Hi, this is Damien Marie AtHope, and I'm an Axiological Atheist. And I'm here with my guest. Could you please tell us your name and what kind of atheist you are?
My name is Ruth Jenkins. I'm an anti-theist. I am I'm a queer person. I am a mother. I am also an axiological atheist. I'm a strong atheist. I believe in talking about atheism. That kind of sums it up.
Okay. Well, I'm going to get to the things. I'll address Axiological Atheist since that's me, since you brought it up. Axiological Atheist, for people to know, first let me just explain really quick what axiology is for anyone who doesn't know. Axiology is actually a philosophy, and then formal axiology is actually a social science. Okay, so it's called formal axiology. That's usually what a person that's axiology would be using, since formal axiology follows science, evolution, and is non-religious. That would be usually what someone who's an axiological atheist would be subscribing to. Where the philosophy, it could be religious, it could be not. It just means value theory. So that inherently probably is not what an axiological atheist would use. We would use the one that's science-based. So an axiological, when it's added to atheism, is considered to be an argument for atheism. The reason I say that's who I am, because everything it stands for, I stand for. Also because I consider myself to be an axiologist before anything. Atheism is just added to what I consider to be my scientific approach to axiology in every part of my life. So it's also considered to be anthropocentric type of argument, which basically says humans are first, or humans have value, or really it's not really just humans, but anything that has a high cognitive ability has value. And the main thing that's very different about formal axiology is that it says that humans have value, ideas don't have value. And that would include the idea called God. Because God is an idea, it is not a proven thing. So it cannot have ideas, cannot have value over human beings. So, anyways, could you please explain what a strong atheist is to you, what queer means to you for people that don't know?
Sure. In my case, as queer, it's more of a general label because, for one, I don't like to, broadcast something that doesn't really apply. I don't know how to say this exactly, to my life, because as it stands, I am a married woman and my husband is a man. So, for all intents and purposes, we are a straight couple.
Okay.
So, the queer, I use that label because it's a big part of who I am and who I've been, and how I understand the world, who I empathize with, who I can sympathize with. And so queer just means somebody who deviates from this gender, which means your body matches your mind as far as your biological sex goes. Maybe they're not straight, maybe they're not it could be any kind of deviation from the typical, what you would see as an average person. And I say average as opposed to normal because average is just a statistical word describing how most of the population has an attraction to the opposite sex and has an identity which matches their biological gender.
Right.
So, strong atheism is generally accepted to mean a position which prefers atheism, as in it's a view that the person holds and believes that is a superior view. And I think that it's fair to say anyone who has an opinion on anything thinks that their opinion is superior. But strong atheists are generally known to be outspoken, who are not the type to just go out of their way to fit in with a predominantly religious society. So if there were, I don't know, somebody asked to pray for me or something, I would say no, thank you. You know, I would tell them I don't need a prayer, so I would rather not. Whereas a weak atheist, and I don't really like that word because I don't believe that anybody's specific way of being an atheist is wrong. So I don't like that word exactly because it's not, I don't know, it feels derogatory to me a little bit, but just for the lack of a better term, weak atheism is considered the kind of person who just participates in normal religious society without really giving up their atheism.
Right. Well, I would like to address both those terms and how I see them, and what your position to me would be. To me, strong atheism and weak atheism, or positive and negative atheism, for me, philosophically means a strong atheist says, I know there's no God. A weak atheist says, I don't know if there's a God, but I don't believe. And those are called explicit atheism, weak and positive, philosophically. And then there's implicit atheism, which when some people say that all you have to do is not have a belief, that's called implicit atheism, and it's also a form of weak atheism that basically says that everything that doesn't have a belief is an atheist. That would include a baby because they have not yet been given something to believe. But in a sense, most people that are atheists are not in that category because they think rocks can be an implicit atheist. That doesn't really, it's a weak atheism. So that doesn't, lacking a belief, that's all you do need to be an atheist, but most people actually use their mind and are actually going against atheism, against theism. So usually when you have that position, it's some form of explicit that you've thought about it. Once you think about it, to me, you're already no longer an implicit atheist. So when some people say, all you need to be an atheist is just lack belief, that's the weakest form of atheism that no one who's a thinking mind, the moment that you say, well, science says, you've already no longer implicit. So you're already, thinking, so you can no longer use that. But anyways, I do agree with you. I don't tell anybody how to be an atheist. I just try to inform so that people can make choices, and I explain what I believe and why. The other thing that how you're using the term strong and weak for me would be firebrand and accommodationalist atheist. I'm a firebrand. I speak out often, all the time, even if it's to my detriment, because I see my life as a political thing to use my openness to make change, and in all areas. So, and then what you were using for weak atheists is accommodationalists. They believe that we should kind of work with religion, and we shouldn't really offend them, and we should try to get, emphasize that religion could be more positive. Some of that I agree with. It would be great if religion could be more positive. I just think it's constantly going to be negative, because as long as they, to me, indoctrinate children, it's going to be negative. I don't see how that can be no longer negative. I mean, and if they say that, like you said about queer, if they say that gay people were wrong, or trans people were wrong, or intersex people were wrong, then to me, that is negative. I don't know how that can be not negative. If they say, I want to live my life this way, great. If everybody could be religious, could somewhat be like the Amish besides indoctrinating their children, great. But they usually don't. So, that just, because you brought up those terms, and I wanted to classify how I see them. So,
you have a understood meaning philosophy.
Yeah.
Which you clarified, so I appreciate that. And the definitions that I provided are kind of a colloquial understanding more than a philosophical.
Right.
They definitely originate with philosophical meanings, but they've kind of been co-created with this.
Well, right. That's like right, and that reminds me of a lot of people say things in atheism, like you said, colloquial. understanding all the how the philosophy works is hard. It takes a lot of training. I mean, I've done a lot of research, you know, and it's like my book is going to tell a lot too. Some of the things that people say that are colloquialism, like they'll say, you can't prove a negative. Everyone knows that. Well, actually, that's totally false. There's not one logician who's a professionally does that as a profession that agrees with that statement. Not even one. It's 100% do not agree. But almost all of atheism, people that don't understand philosophy, say this. So I mean, just some of the things, or they say everyone has to be agnostic. No, you don't, because actually there's at least two stances of atheism: an agnostic with an I that says that everything you say about religion, God, is just meaningless because you've never defined it. Or there's also theological non-cognitivism that says that the terms you're using don't have any meaning. It's God could be FOD, could be blog. I mean, it doesn't mean anything. So you don't have to. Yeah. So you don't have to. So I'm just saying that people have use colloquialisms a lot, and it doesn't. They don't understand there's actually more going on. I don't care if people think those things, but they're not limited to the only understanding. So, were you always an atheist, or were you raised religious?
I was raised in a Texas town of about 100,000 as a member of the Church of Christ, which is classified as a cult for believing that only members of the Church of Christ are going to be saved. Huh. The church the actual physical building church that I went to as a child, my first visit there, which of course I don't remember because I was about 1 year old, but the first visit that my family went there was my father's funeral, and he died in a way that would be scandalous, I suppose. So,
did you want to talk about that? Or you don't have to if you don't want to.
Well, he died of a drug overdose. So it was like walking into this oppressive, homogenous culture with that being the first impression. And even though I was a child, like an infant, my entire upbringing in that environment was very much us versus them kind of mentality. I was out, so to speak.
Right.
So, since I was raised in the church, I believed what I was told, and I tried really hard to believe in God, and I tried to make that be a positive thing. I was always a very positive child, and especially since there's the whole God is the Father metaphor, right. That was very much applied directly to my life since my dad was dead. So, as I've grown older, when I was about 21, well, I was 19, I was almost 20 years old, I decided to start going to counseling because I realized that I was not nearly as psychologically stable as I thought I was. So, since that started, I've been slowly learning how growing up in that region, especially with a single parent and such a heavy emphasis on God being a direct member of my family, like an influence in my life, how much that raising was detrimental to my mental health. And the town that I grew up in it's not exactly a small town. I mean, 100,000 is not nothing, but it is in the middle of nowhere. It's the biggest town, the surrounding, 6-county area. So, it was kind of like, and it's also got 3 major Christian universities, so it just draws other like-minded people in. It's this very, very closed-minded place. So, it took me a long time. I actually was still a believer whenever I started going to counseling, but I had long since given up going to church. because of how oppressive the culture was and how much of an outcast I was socially because of being raised by a single mother and also being in poverty, they just really turned me off. Because I had questions. I had, like, theological questions whenever I was growing up as a preteen, an adolescent, and a teenager. And no one I ever talked to would ever entertain my ideas or accept that I had questions. They would just kind of shut me down and move on to their whatever lesson they had prepared. So I stopped going to church probably when I was in middle school. And then a few years later, I found a church with my sister where the pastor was actually a very open-minded person. And we're still friends to this day, actually. But, you know, that just took me one step further in my journey from being a really strict believer to an open-minded believer to somebody who rejected Christianity but still believed in a God, and then finally to somebody who was an atheist. And that happened really only about 2 years ago. So I'm fairly new to the position of atheism, but it has been extremely liberating to stop doing the gymnastics, to stop trying to play the apologetic game, to just look at logic, stop trying to act like not making sense is a good thing. Because that's a legitimate part of culture. It's like, it's not supposed to make sense, and you're not supposed to rely on your own knowledge. It's the greater the mystery, the greater the concept, you know. So I've felt a great deal of relief getting out of that constant cognitive dissonance. I have to go grab my computer charger real quick.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, so that what you're talking about right there also brings up for me about there's a philosophy difference of why I say I believe things and why I do not say I use the word faith. In philosophy, there is such a thing as justified true beliefs equal knowledge. But there is no such thing as faith justified or justified faith equals anything. In philosophy, faith is basically the lack of enough justification to form or to hold a belief with soundness or warrant. Right. So that's an important thing that people don't get. you're,
right.
So when you say, like in philosophy, when you say you have a belief, what you're making is a claim that is not validated itself. So faith is that I believe something because I want to or I hope to. That's not any soundness at all. And so that's why so there's actually in philosophy a thing called a type of thinking about faith called fideism, and it basically is considered faithism. And what it proposes is that what religious people usually say is that faith is better than reason, or it's actually that reason is against faith, which is nonsense. If you have to, like you said, if you have to throw down reason to bring up faith, then what you're having faith in is nonsense.
Right. I'm actually acquainted with Dr. Peter Boghossian. I'm not sure if you.
Yeah, I know he is. Yeah.
Been very kind to my husband and I, and his fee, and he is a philosophy professor.
Yes, sir.
His fee is a great source of mental exercises and good, challenging questions about the fallacies within faithful complex. So that's what that means.
No, I agree. I like him. I would say that as an atheist, he's probably, him and Christopher Hitchens are probably close to how I think. I'm a little bit different than him because to me, he's good. He wants to redefine things like faith. I personally don't care what you call it. You can call it any damn thing you want, because I'll tell you that in philosophy, faith is not valid. So it really doesn't matter what they want to say. Well, faith means this or faith means that. I know. I like that he redefines faith as believing things, without evidence or something like that. Can't remember off the top of my head now, but it really, to me, doesn't matter what they call it. I don't care what I tell people that that in the acquisition of knowledge, faith is not worth believing in. It's that simple. It doesn't matter what you want to call faith. If you're looking to actually know something, faith is not the method to use ever at any time. It does not produce or justify or validate anything. And I tell people too that the thing you have to understand is, without science, what you feel is true could be completely wrong. Right now, you feel that you are not moving when you're sitting down, but actually, any point on the Earth is about 1,000 miles an hour because the Earth is spinning, rotating right on its axis. Not just that, it's also spinning through the galaxy. Then the galaxy is actually, our galaxy is actually spinning in the universe. I mean, everything is constantly moving, but you feel no movement. So you could say, in my heart, I know we're not moving. I am sitting still, and you would be fucking wrong.
Right, yeah. But the thing with faith is that, as somebody with a grace field, it is ingrained over and over and over, just drilled in the brain that faith is a virtue. Faith is a virtue.
Right. Right.
And to have your faith waver, to question, is such horrible, horrible thing to do. And the amount of guilt that goes along with questioning, seriously questioning, it's astronomical. And so it's very difficult to get, I don't know, get a believer to see, like, even in a regular, amicable conversation, to see how faith might not be.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to impress that upon somebody with faith.
How was it for you? For me, I know when I stopped believing, I was almost overwhelmed. The feeling is because also I realized my whole life was changing. It's not like you just, I stopped believing in Santa Claus. It's like, I stopped believing in America or something. I mean, or I stopped believing in my gender, or I stopped, believing in my sexuality. It was like life changing for me. How was it for you?
I guess for me, it was almost like a catharsis, because I had always tried. I don't know. It was such an effort for me to actually believe in God. I had to try so hard, and I had never realized that I was trying that hard to believe in something. I was just convincing myself that I believed in it, even though it didn't make any sense, and I knew it didn't make any sense. But it was so suppressed by my own decision that it was my husband, before we were married, that kind of broke that last shield, but that last wall down. Because I had, like I said, I had progressed from a great Christian to an open-minded Christian to somebody who was, like, not Christian but still spiritual and still believed in God, and then finally to the point where making jokes about no God, that was funny to me. And then finally, at some point, after I befriended my husband before we were married, he was just chatting with me. He was already an atheist, much more in the circuit already, and kind of started talking to me about stuff that, I don't know, I think it was Dawkins, something Dawkins had said, just pointing out, some kind of flawed thinking. And I was like, yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And then it was almost like I'd already been an atheist, and I could just not really come to terms with it verbally. But like I said, once I really embraced that and started to read the literature, hear the arguments, and listen to the philosophy and that sort of thing, it was like a catharsis. And a few months after that, I was at family reunion for Thanksgiving, and my family is all Church of Christ.
Right.
And my husband and I had just gotten married a few weeks before that, and we were splitting our Thanksgiving in two. One with my family, and we were about to drive to Houston, several hours away. So we were saying our goodbyes and everything. And my family was all sitting in this circle around, like we were at the head of it,
right,
by the fire. And my grandmother comes up to us and says, your marriage is like a triangle. You're here on the ends, and the closer you get to God, the closer you get to each other. And so, at that moment, he and I both kind of just like, just had this, like, big moment. And so I just said, I want to go ahead and stop you there. I think it's something everyone should know, and I wasn't planning on talking about it to everyone or anything like that, but we are atheists, so it would really mean a lot to us if you could say things like that. And if you would, express your love and support for us in ways that are secular. And it was kind of like, just almost like a bomb had dropped. It seemed so awkward, and everyone was like, oh, okay. Like, my family's great, I love them, and they were all trying to be supportive, but the culture in West Texas is so homogenous that I don't think that they had any idea of how to actually really do that well.
Right.
So they were all just saying, oh yeah, we'll pray for you. Like, I know you're trying to be nice, but you're totally missing the point. So it was funny, but that was probably the closest that I ever came to religious coming out. And then, before that, I had posted on Facebook, but it didn't occur to me until after that I didn't have most of those people on my Facebook list. It was mostly my mother's side of the family, which I was with my dad's side of the family.
Right.
So they had all missed the post, and they had no idea. So it was kind of funny. But, yeah, my family is, for the most part, extremely accepting and very kind, some more than others, but it was definitely life-changing for me, but in a much more gradual and subtle kind of way. I think by the time that I encountered the whole philosophy, I had already become so comfortable questioning and rejecting that it didn't really rock my world, so to speak. But it definitely was cathartic.
Yeah, that's good. My experience was with I outed kind of a similar way to yours, but I was already an atheist, and I didn't want to tell my family because my family I knew was going to be very non-supporting. My family, my whole life is my dad was in a religious cult called the local church, and with Witness Lee, and my mom was an evangelical, Pentecostal, non-denominational, complete fanatic. I mean, talking about walking around the house, and putting oil in the doors to keep the demons out, and just pretty radical. And they're assistant pastors. My sister and her husband are youth pastors for a church. My other cousin is a pastor for a church in Illinois, and just a lot of very, very strong religious. I mean, there's not anyone that is an atheist or even agnostic or anything. And my mom, on the phone, because she was living in a different place, she said, oh, I'll pray for you. And I didn't say anything. And she goes, are you mad at God? So that's when I said, well, no, because I don't believe there is a God. I would be mad at the concept. And then then she started getting real angry. Well, what about Jesus and this and that was going on. And then I basically, said a few things. I don't remember what I said exactly, but I said stuff to debunk what she was saying and to challenge it, and because I already knew some stuff, I know way more now. And then she started crying, and I'm going to hell and all this, and she went to get off the phone. Then wasn't maybe like about a month or two later, I didn't call her. A month or two later, she calls me up. Goes, well, I'm gonna love you anyways. I mean, I go, don't do me any favors. I did nothing wrong. Either you love me or you don't. If you have to love me, if you have to work at it, then you don't love me. And then she hung up. And then in another 2 months, she called up and says, I can love you. And I said, once again, don't do me any favors. Don't act like this is something special. You either love me or you don't. It's not I love you if or I love you anyways. You love me or you don't. And then she's like, well, I love you. I go, well, then there you go. So we've had like a stalemate kind of a relationship with me and my mom. She tried to challenge me again on religion, and I eviscerated her because by that time I was even more knowledgeable. I mean, there's tons of things I know. Like Exodus was the first book of the Bible written. Moses didn't write any books of the Bible. Jesus was a Jew. He never cared about the rest of the world. He actually, even in the stories, he thought that he was going to come back and then be the king, and the world was going to change right then and there within 50 years. So everyone believing that Jesus, it's total nonsense. Never was a Christian. Never cared about the rest of the world ever. I mean, the whole story is totally made up about that. Even if there was an actual person named Jesus. I mean, there's tons of stuff I know, and I was just hammering her with it. Adam and Eve is not a moral story. Satan is not Lucifer. Satan is not the devil. Satan is not, the snake in the garden. I mean, the snake in the garden in Genesis clearly states in Genesis that it's the most crafty of the creatures created in the garden. So that totally shows that it wasn't anything to do with the devil, or even if you believe the story, it doesn't match up with the whole Christian nonsense. Jewish nonsense. It's all total bullshit, and it's nothing special anyways. All that stuff, Paul, like the books of Paul, he only for sure wrote 7 books. All the rest are forgeries written in his name. I mean, the Bible is just full of total nonsense. Paul wrote every one of his things before one of the Gospels were written. The Gospel of Mark was written before Matthew. I mean, they all stole from Mark. The last chapter of Mark, where it says, that Jesus rose from the dead, that's a forgery. That last part is totally added. They know it's added. It's totally fake. It's just fake after fake after, it's like ridiculous. So she decided that, okay, I hear you, and I don't want to talk about it no more, because I want to believe. I want to believe in Jesus no matter what.
Yeah, and that's the thing that it comes down to whenever I have conversations with people who are religious and also respect me enough to have a conversation about it, is that I want to believe. That's
right.
what it comes down to. It's like Mulder,
Yeah, I want to believe no matter what.
And there are varying degrees of the kinds of premises that people would accept, like an example of a religious person who's very open and talks to me often is my sister. She is she takes little stances. Just knows that she cares about being a person, that that's important to her, and she tries to make sure that she doesn't let that stop her from helping people, and also doesn't make her any more closed-minded. Like, that's her main focus.
Right.
She tries to stick to things that are generally accepted, like as theology, and then kind of doesn't really have a firm stance on a lot of it. Whereas there's another friend of ours who's he has the same font as me, my husband, in my hometown, a little restaurant, and he's got the nickname the Atheist Evangelist, which is our friend's actual entertainer title. I don't know if you've heard of Roscoe, Sam Singleton, the Atheist Evangelist. He does a stage play where he's...
Oh, Sam Singleton. Yeah, I actually saw him in Riverside, California.
He's a good friend of my husband and I. So anyways, but our friend in Abilene has the nickname Atheist Evangelist because he's an actual... He's not a theologian, but he's involved in the religious community as a leader of sorts. I'm not sure exactly what kind of leader he is, but he was very, very interested in talking questions and talking theology and talking to people who are atheist, agnostic, or just alternative faiths with him, and brings those subjects up, and he talks to his other fellow believers about these problems in logic, and it's funny. So there are varying degrees of where different believers are and what they'll talk about, but for the most part, I've had a great experience with talking to people, and even so, it still really does come down to wanting to believe.
Yeah, it does, because it's not really reason, and the more you look, the harder it should be. The more you understand science. I don't know how anybody can go through all education and stuff and still, have total belief. They want to believe. They're not. It's like it's like 79% of philosophers are atheists. It's only like 13% actually believe. I mean, once you learn stuff, it's like you said about Peter Boghossian. Once you start being able to think properly, it's pretty hard to use faith. Because it's even if you do want to believe, it's kind of like, there's just too many reasonable questions.
Right. Yeah, and that's the name of a podcast that I like to listen to, Reasonable Doubts. That's the whole thing. It's like they're good questions. They're reasonable.
Yeah.
Like, I made a post the other day that included the question on the subject of how I find it very irritating when people respond to things like news stories about atrocities or natural disasters. They say, God bless, or I'm praying, or this and that, when even legally those things are considered acts of God.
Right.
I think in terms of God is actively making this happen, but you're praying to Him to make Him stop. It doesn't really make sense, but the question that I asked you is, why should we beg? Why should we have to beg a God that supposedly loves us to not torture, maim, and kill us? It does not make any sense. I said, hypothetically, if I had supernatural powers and I had no influence to time, I would end suffering and not expect to be worshipped for it. I would just be glad to do that because it's just the right thing to do. I wouldn't want anyone to suffer if they didn't think it was my doing. It's totally irrational and very, very self-serving and not kind at all. The whole description of Yahweh is very cool.
Well, I agree. It's like you asking for a medal for not torturing your child to death.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. That's a given. Why would you even think that, it's like, no, you don't get thanks for that.
Yeah, exactly like that. I mean, it's, God supposedly created man in His image. And we are supposedly the children of God. So, if my son turns, 7 or 8 years old, and he's, old enough to understand the responsibility to some degree, punishment, that sort of thing. It would be like me saying, you know, devote X amount of time to me every single week, just praising you for taking care of you, or else I'm going to, you know, hurt you. Like, that's so ridiculous.
Yeah, I totally agree.
It's totally twisted.
Well, like you said about man's image, that reminds me of one of the things that I learned in school that really, for psychology that I took, that really profoundly started me thinking was when in a biology class in human sexuality, they said everyone starts out as a female, that female is the default gender for human. That blew me away. I'm like, what? Because, I mean, if Adam was first and then came Eve from Adam, like you said, man, God created man, how come we're all female? How come we start out as female? It takes 3 processes to actually make a man. It takes anti-feminizing androgens, it takes masculizing androgens, and then testosterone. So it's like, why would that, if supposedly, because like creationism, you know, we're in our original form, why would you need to unfemale to make a man?
Yeah, there's so much wrong with creationism that it's, I think, suitable for us to kind of just get on, discuss another topic, because anybody who knows anything about really any kind of science or logic can attest to how creationism is, at the very least, not believable.
Yeah. It's certainly not the most plausible.
Right.
So, when you changed 2 years ago, did anything for you change? Like, what could you say that was something that you felt was different?
Well,
besides, you said you felt better, you know, freer, but what else?
One thing that has been notable is how I've cut so many people out of my life since then. And a lot of that has to do with me learning how to set boundaries. Like I said, you know, I've been going to a counselor for some time now, and I've been learning how to just be a healthy person. Because the upbringing I had left me in psychological shambles, so to speak.
Right.
But a lot of those arguments were pivoted around God or God-centered topics of the Bible or things like that. One notable example would be, do you remember when the Duck Dynasty guy, Phil Robertson, said his on about how being gay is like bestiality and all that stuff?
Yeah.
Well, somebody I know had posted about it on Facebook, and in the comments, people started talking about what the Bible said about it. And so I got on to the thread, and I was just going to say, why is the Bible even relevant in this topic? Because it doesn't matter what the Bible says. Right. This guy was just being creative.
Right.
I had been posting and talking about my atheism for a little bit at that point. It was fairly new still.
Right.
And apparently the friend that I was talking to in that moment, I guess, had some kind of issue with how much I talked about it, because as soon as I said the Bible was irrelevant, I was talking about that specific issue, not how the Bible is totally irrelevant.
Right.
Basically, just said the Bible is irrelevant to this discussion because it holds no sway over whether or not Bill Robertson would be completed. But that response that I got was going to be on the Bible and this and that, and then I started calling names and like all this ridiculous stuff. And then they were making fun of me for being atheist. And I was like, you know what? I don't think we should be friends anymore. So that was that. Like I said, that was a notable example, but there have been family members who just wouldn't drop it. And mostly just the family members, because I have a huge My mom is one of 6 children.
Oh yeah.
Her parents are each one's one of 5 and then 8, so I have a huge extended family. And it was interesting to see how, like I said earlier, when I post about my atheistic sentiments, it's received as an invitation for Christianism, and not like just me expressing my thoughts. And to some degree, I do like to start conversations, so I don't say, I don't fault anyone for responding if I have asked questions. That if I ask questions, what's the purpose? To get someone thinking and to solicit a conversation. But oftentimes, whenever I do make public posts about questions or challenges, it is received as an invitation. And the question is often not even addressed, and it just goes straight into proselytizing or some sort of ploy that makes religious thoughts into it. So, but that's to be expected with the amount of religious people that I know. Just because I'm a very small minority among my group of friends and my extended groups of just acquaintances.
Right.
Most people that I know are religious, and that's fine. I don't have any problem with them as people, but I did, when I was introducing myself, I am an anti-theist because I believe that religion does nothing special and also causes harm. So
Right.
I think whatever good people.
So when you say that, for me, I know, to me, I have an issue with how some people use it, not you, but in general, but even other people that use anti-theism. Anti-theism, I agree with what it means, except it only means religions with a god. That's all it means. Theism is the belief in a god. So anti-theism is against anything that believes in a god, or against God itself, the concept. So I always classify that I'm also an anti-religionist, because I'm against all religions, whether or not they have a god. So I was going to ask you, when you say, because you say religions, do you mean anti-religionism also, or are you okay if a religion doesn't have a god?
I'm actually not familiar with any religions that don't have gods, except for the nonsense term pantheist, because that's just a nice way of saying atheist. And I say nice.
I'll just tell you something. Confucianism is, even though Confucius did say that there probably was gods, or he did believe in gods, Confucianism itself doesn't believe in gods. There's forms of Taoism that doesn't believe in gods, although Taoism believes in supernatural forces and spirits, and in a sense, I guess, could believe in God. No personal God. Buddhism, there's forms of Buddhism that believe in God, and there's forms that believe that gods are some kind of other beings, but there's also ones that are somewhat atheist in the fact that they don't believe in that, but they still believe in karma and rebirth. And but okay, I would say there also is forms of atheistic Hinduism, sort of. But anyways, so
yes, then I definitely pay these my attention. I am familiar with those religions, and I am against all religions.
Right.
And I don't say that because I think religious people are bad people necessarily. It's just that, and that's something that's often confused. When you say you are anti
yes
something, and people hold that thing sacred, it offends their sensibilities without them ever considering what that might actually mean about you as a person. I think if they need to be curious enough to ask, that it would actually be something they could respect, because for me, the reason I say I am anti-theist and anti-religion is because it's divisive. Yes. That's ultimately all it is. And if you subscribe to a religion, even if you're not a tribalist person, there are undoubtedly other people who have that same religion who use it as primitive tribalism in order to divide people and tell other people they're wrong and try to oppress those people.
Yes, I totally agree.
Especially the majority. And I feel like whatever kind of good religion might inspire people to do, they could just as easily do that good anyways without needing presence or existence of God to do evil.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. And I agree too. I said about anti. I've been told before, since I always tell people I'm anti-agnostic. But what I'm not an anti-agnostic people. I'm anti the belief that we have to doubt things that are unreasonable. Things that have not been defined. If people say, well, you have to doubt a God, you don't know if it's real. And I always ask them, what is a God? Tell me what's a God, and I don't want to hear some explanation that doesn't have proof or evidence. But it's not against people. I don't care if people call themselves agnostic. I don't agree with it. But I don't agree if it's not for them. I don't agree if it's for me. The thought that something needs to be doubted when it's not reasonable. It's like I try to tell people, for me, things have to make sense in the natural world. I'm a rationalist, not a skeptic. If you say that the planet Pluto is in your pocket, I don't reserve doubt until I look. Because I know that that doesn't fit the natural world. You're making a claim that is unreasonable. And to me, the God claim is completely unreasonable. It doesn't deserve doubt.
Yeah.
But like you said, that's my position. That's not against anybody. But people have been seriously angry and pissed off and called me names because of that. Or I've had someone before tell me that everything anti is bad. And I go, well, then the Anti-Defamation League, who fights against oppression and anti-Semitism and hate, I guess you think they're bad, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing. You can... It's very hard for people to distinguish religion from their own personal, characteristics.
Right.
Because people have not yet really been accustomed to the concept of treating religion like an idea rather than a trait.
Right.
And, I speaking with Dawkins earlier, one of the things that I enjoy that he says is the whole thing about Catholic child or Christian child. You wouldn't say this is a democratic child because it's too young to know. So why would you call it, any kind of a religion? It's something that people think of as part of their identity. And in a sense it is part of their identity. An adult has chosen this, and so it applies to them demographically. But as far as being a redhead or having brown eyes or brown skin or being gay, it's not that kind of a trait. It's a choice, and people don't really think of it that way yet. And I think that the more respect that atheists get, the more, I guess, airtime, so to speak, that atheists get, where people realize they know atheists, they love atheists, and they don't just seek to suck all the fun out of everything, I feel like that's a horrible misconception. That once that perception kind of fades away, that, people will be more open to the idea of thinking of and treating people like it is just an idea. Because, saying I'm anti-whatever, anti-racism, anti-ism, anti-religion, it's the same sort of thing. Not saying that religion is necessarily sexist or racist, but just that it's the same kind of concept because they're all ideas.
Right, you wouldn't say that. I would. I would say that all religions are inherently sexist, or sexism has got into the culture so much that the religion adopts sexism, that there really almost is not one that's not. And they,
that's
I mean,
that's
so,
a big part of
and once again, I would say almost all of them are also homophobic. So I mean, that's universally, in most religions condemn. Even Buddhism, people don't understand. Buddhism says that women cannot become enlightened. They have to be reborn as a man before they can reach enlightenment. Disgusting, fucking, and it, right? Talk about sexism. What the fuck? And then it also says that monks can't be gay, because that's a sin and stuff, in Buddhism. It's just nonsense. Just more homophobia, more, I heard a Dalai Lama one time, well, that's only for the monks. Other people, we don't have an opinion. Yeah, you do have an opinion. You're trying to say it's different, but you're still saying it's a sin. You don't get to say that, and it makes sense, in any form of reason.
Right.
You can't.
That's something they don't understand. If you say it about anyone, you're saying it about the if I say, like, in Texas, and I don't even want to use this example because I hate to be even hypothetically racist, but say in Texas the majority is better than the minority, but in the rest of the United States, everyone's equal.
Yeah.
That's still putting someone above someone else, and that's wrong.
Right. Well, I know, but their thing is that, well, these people are holy and sacred, so they can't do something that's sinful. Do you know how offensive that is? So it's not a sin for you because you're not holy. It's like, well, that's a double put down.
Exactly. And then there's the inevitable occurrence where somebody who is gay wants to be a monk.
Exactly. Right.
And then you're discriminating against people.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, the whole thing. It's just so amazing that all these religions have this uniform, to me, thing that they all have this oppression of sexuality. You know.
It is very strange and very
human.
Yeah. Where's your man?
It's like what's the most bigoted thing that humans do? They oppress sexuality. What if all the religions seem to do? Wow, the same damn thing. I wonder who made them.
Right, yeah.
When you realize that moment that your God hates everyone you do.
I like that quote, yeah. Oh, what's the matter? Why are you upset?
So, do you feel that anyone in your family or people around you put more pressure on you being a mother who's an atheist than just being an atheist without having a child or without being a woman?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I said, do you feel more pressure from people in your family or people around you being an atheist as a mother than if you would just be not a woman or not a mother?
Oh, yeah. One of my husband's family members sent us a letter congratulating us on our pregnancy in response to our announcement, and proceeded to tell us how sad she was that we reject God and that we're going to be raising our child to reject God, and that we should read C.S. Lewis and really give it a shot. Like, C.S. Lewis is a good author, and I have read C.S. Lewis, and I'm familiar with him, and that theology, I mean, it's pretty basic theology, and so, it was almost humorous, but it was also very hurtful in a way, because you don't see that happening a lot of the time to other types of, when somebody's in the majority of
right.
their areas. There have been a number of instances where we were discriminated against for being atheists, and the most stark one I think that applies to me as a female that I can think of was, for some reason, there's this group locally that, and maybe it's just in this group, but it seems to me to be a bigger problem, that anti-feminism is cool for some reason. That it's like real hip to say, oh, feminism, like feminists are this, feminists are crazy, whatever. And so, I've been part of a number of conversations online with people who I know personally, where I would be saying, you're being sexist by saying this about all feminists, because it's inherently about the struggle that women have to face, and you're saying it doesn't exist. That's very sexist, especially coming from a male view where you don't have that first-hand experience, you don't have that understanding, and instead of being considered briefly, I was painted as a radical. I was mocked, and the only time that the points I was making were considered was when another man said so. Another man agreed with me. And so that was definitely, and those were atheist people, so that's the only reason that I use that example. So it's definitely, I mean, sexism, I feel, is much less severe in the atheist circuit, but it is still there. And in some pockets, it's a lot more severe because these people that I've encountered, and I see kind of the same mentality, have this position like, oh, we're going against the grain. Just like with our atheism, we're going against the feminist mainstream. And we're hardcore, and we're unique, and we're thought-provoking for feeling this way. But really all they're doing is just marginalizing women and mocking the struggle that is being a woman. As if having legal protections means that there is no more discrimination whatsoever. That's not the case. Just because there are laws doesn't mean that things don't still happen. I mean, I don't shave my legs or my armpits, and whenever I go out in public, and I also have a mohawk, but before I had a mohawk, I didn't shave my legs and armpits. And
you talked a little fast. Before you had a mohawk, what? I didn't hear it. Couldn't hear you.
I still didn't shave my body hair,
and
I would get scares for just being in the natural state that my body is. And people talk about women who don't shave their body hair. They talk about that subject like those women don't really exist. Like those women are not real people. Like they don't have opinions or thoughts or feelings. Like they can't be rational people. And I've encountered conversations about that where people say, oh, how gross, how lazy. And it's like, why is a man's body hair normal and natural, but a woman's body hair is gross, and if she doesn't take care of it, it's lazy? It doesn't make sense. And on that subject, it's like, I did used to shave my legs, but my hair is really thick and coarse, and so when it grows in, I actually get horrible ingrown hairs, and it's very painful. So that's why I stopped shaving my legs for what you could call a health reason. But that's not how people see it. So it's hard to say exactly how atheism and intersect, but I think the mentality that women are less intelligent or less deserving of bullying, so to speak, that mentality, for the most part, does not translate into atheism. But outside of atheism, it definitely still applies to people who are not atheists, still consider me less worth listening to, less worth considering, and less valid for being women. And being a parent, I really haven't received a lot of flack except for the letter that I told you about. And I think that's probably because I haven't been setting boundaries with people. And so by the time the child came around, it was, the people who were still in my life at that point have pretty well proven themselves to be respectful people. But, it's only a matter of time before my son comes home and is worried that I'm going to go to hell or, something like that because somebody told him something that, you know, was derogatory. But on the subject of parenting, my husband and I are of the mind to raise our child and give him all the information he asks for, present him with information about world religions, present him with anything that can be proven true, and not to be persuasive or anything, but at the same time, if he asks us questions about our beliefs or lack of belief, we'll be honest with him. But in no way will we impose on him what we believe. We'll show him how to tell the difference between facts and hypotheses and theories and speculations. We'll have, teach him eventually how to tell the difference between good information and bad information, misinformation,
right?
That kind of stuff. We'll teach him how to be a critical thinker, and the way that we see it is if we teach him how to do that, then a rational viewpoint will follow.
Yeah.
And I don't want to impose any specific on him because he's his own person. He's just a baby right now, but
right.
if he grows up to be somebody who believes in a superior being, then I'm still going to love him. I'm not going to change the way that I feel about my son just because he believes differently. But I also don't think he'll have any resistance to you.
Right, yeah, usually you believe stuff because you've been taught to believe. It's not super common for, but so I wanted to address the feminism thing. I appreciate your struggle, and I appreciate that you've voiced stuff about feminism, and I want to apologize that you've been attacked in the atheist community for being a feminist. I find it to be fucking disgusting that our movement should be fucking rationalism and reason, even has this fucking problem, and I just do not fucking get it. But my wife has to tell me all the time that just because someone's an atheist doesn't mean that they understand how to fucking reason, or use evidence, and doesn't mean that they're actually humanists. There's some people that are atheists that aren't humanists, and some people don't understand how important feminism is, and to me it is. It's very important. But I'm also an anarchist, so I consider myself to be a anarcho-feminist. And anarcho-feminist basically is the position that there is no such thing as anarchism without feminism. Period. That you cannot have a lack of hierarchy, social structure, while you support patriarchy. Period. So, I mean, that's why people would, say, well, what, am I into radical feminism or not? I don't know. All I can tell you is I'm against fucking sexism and patriarchy. And anybody who's against it, I'm for it. Anyone who says that, that women are equal people, I'm for. Anyone who treats women as less than an equal person, I'm against. Period. And I agree with you. I hate when they talk shit about feminists. Like, well, I don't know. I'm a feminist. You have a problem with that? And I do think it's also really sad, too, that I can say almost anything about feminism, and people are usually relatively, even if they don't like me, they're somewhat respectful, where if I was a woman and said this, I'd get probably death threats, because I know a couple feminists who are females, and they get all kinds of hate mail and death threats and shit from atheists. It's disgusting. And I think that has to change. But I also want to address that I don't think feminism just addresses women. I mean, I'm mildly intersex and genderqueer. I like to shave. I get put down because I shave my legs, or I shave my armpits, and I shave my arms. I fucking hate hair. I think it's disgusting as hell. Not for you. I'm talking about for my own self. Right. I don't like it because it's just my own personal thing. But I get put down. Why the hell do you do that? The hell's wrong with you? Like I'm some kind of fucking freak. How dare I? Or I paint my fingernails, and how dare I paint my toes too? What the fuck?
Just because a woman doesn't shave or a man does shave doesn't mean that they're bad. It's the idea that each gender should conform to a certain set of standards.
Right.
And that's dangerous because, like you said about being intersex, even your biological sex is not conforming. So the idea that not conforming is just bad is something that has always harmed society and always will.
Right. And that's why I tell people, too, that to me, I see feminism as absolutely needed. It needs to be talked about all the time. I mean, and think of all the ways we can put down a man. They usually have to do with just calling him a female.
Right.
If a man is bad, you call him a pussy. A pussy is a part of a female. If a man cries, you don't say, don't be a little boy. You tell him, don't be a little girl. Because the biggest put down you can be is to be not a man or to be a female.
Right, yeah.
Or if you're a strong person, they tell you get balls or you have balls. Well, you can't. They don't. No one tells a female, well, get some ovaries, have some ovaries. You know, it's completely sexist. And so, you know, and like you were talking about too, I really don't like when people say, well, I'm against feminazis. I'm like, what the fuck does that even mean? That means nothing to me. As an anarcho, feminist, that means zero to me. All I hear, if you say that someone is against men and they're a feminist, then guess what? To me, they're not a feminist.
There's a different word for that. It's
Yeah.
called misandry.
Right.
If somebody is a misandrist, then they're a misandrist.
Right.
If somebody is a feminist,
That's correct. So I go, there's no such thing to me as a feminazi, because if you're saying that person is against men, well, then they're not a feminist. They should be for equal rights for all people.
That's the part that bothers me the most, because a lot of these people I hear say this argument is, well, I don't like to call myself a feminist because of the radicals. Well, if you don't like the way that feminism is represented, then be a feminist that you think should be representative of feminism.
I agree.
You support equal rights, you support equal rights, and that's the definition of feminism. You don't get to just change the definition because you don't like it. That's not how words work. Definitions have words. It's not the other way around.
Right, well, that goes on to another point, too. They say, well, I'm a humanist. And then I say, well, did you look up the definition of what humanism is? Because I think that you're not really understanding the word. The word humanism has to do with the fact of using human ideas, not using God, not using faith, to understand the world. To believe that humans have the human power to create their own ethics without gods or religion. That's really what humanism is.
And also the idea that human life is valuable, and human life is inherently good.
So, a lot of times when they're talking like that, they're actually going to axiology, because that axiology is the understanding of what is good and why it's good. But and then some of them say, well, I'm an equalist, or I'm an equalitarian. Well, equalitarian is a political philosophy. It's not. Yeah, egalitarianism, exactly. So, but like you said, it's so funny how they want to do everything, but then so they'll say they don't want to use the word because it singles out a gender, and I'm like, oh, so then you don't talk about LGBT pride, right? Well, yeah, I do. Well, that singles out a sexuality, singles out genders, because you know why? You need to, because you need to address problems.
Right. Right, and if it were a matriarchal society, then the movement should be man-focused,
That's right.
But since it's a patriarchy, the movement is woman-focused, and it's not woman-focused because women are superior, or women are better, or women are in charge. It's because women should be treated as equal, and men and women should do whatever they feel is best for them, and not based on their gender. That's the thing that people don't really understand about feminism whenever they go against it, is that it's not about women becoming the superior sex. It's just about reaching a point where women and men aren't expected to do certain things just because of their sex. That's the goal, and for women and men not to be discriminated against just because of their sex.
Right.
For the most part, discrimination that's sex-based is directed toward women. But there are very serious, sex discriminations, like child custody. A lot of times mothers get the child custody right off the bat, even if they're less fit parent. A small example that I find a little bit humorous, but I've encountered quite a bit, is when my husband and I are out in public with our child, I'm the one who always has to change the diapers, because a lot of times the men's restroom does not even have a changing table.
Right.
So that's a very small, pretty benign example, but it's a very real example of sexism that, I mean, if you can imagine how would his old dad cope with that situation. If he's the only one who's there to change the baby's diaper, where is he going to go? You know, to the women's restroom where you can face, you know, harassment for being in the wrong restroom. And that brings me on to another subject, which is the whole transgender bathroom issue. That's not a real issue. Bathrooms are the place where we defecate and get rid of our excrement. It should not matter who goes in or unisex bathrooms have existed in the country forever, and it's never, I mean, there are minor instances of crime, but no more than where crime happens elsewhere. You know, it's not, there's this whole scare tactic that people try to use that, oh, if bathrooms are made unisex, or if anyone can just go into any bathroom because they feel like it, then, well, think of the children. It's like this ridiculous argument from absurdity, but anyways.
Well, yeah, that's like you're talking about children. Usually when they talk about children, they're not probably inherently talking about molestation. They're just talking about seeing naked or of another body, but which is totally unfounded, really, because I mean, I'm in nudism, and I've lived on nudist resorts, and some have children, but they've done psychological studies that actually prove the opposite. People think children that are exposed to naked actually have less body shame. And usually have better social lives. They don't judge people as much. It doesn't harm them, isn't it? I mean, people like you talk about your body born natural. I mean, I don't know. There's this thing called, you know, Aboriginal people that didn't have clothes on. You know, our society where everything, you know, is like body shamed. You know, the nakedness is somehow evil or something. It's ridiculous. Just like the fact of, I mean, I think that everyone should be able to go, you know, naked. I think that women should be able to be topless. I think that this whole thing, the people arguing about can a mother breastfeed in public, all this stuff, it's just so, it's so nonsense to me. Just.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had a number of people approach me about breastfeeding in public. One, that would be, I guess, a good example of being a mother, and the kind of discrimination that I face. Luckily, in Texas, the law is that anywhere I'm allowed to be, I'm allowed to breastfeed. If I'm allowed to be there by law, I'm not trespassing, then I can breastfeed, and nobody can tell me otherwise.
I don't know it because I don't want to breastfeed, obviously. Is that a law? Not. I thought where I would think the whole United States should be like that. It's not.
No, I don't know the specific laws in each of the other states, but there are places where you can be told to leave, like a private business. I would suspect it's probably the Midwestern and the central United States mostly, because the coasts tend to be on point with that sort of stuff. But I'm surprised, actually, that Texas is so protective in that sense, because normally they're not. I mean, it's still... I think it's still legal.
Do you find any difference in that between atheists and religious people? On how they view that subject to you?
Well, my son's only 3 months old, so I haven't had a whole lot of exposure to the opinions of people. But I find that a lot of people who give me compliments for breastfeeding are women and people who live alternative, have maybe some kind of piercings or tattoos, are predisposed to kind of support things that aren't mainstream in the first place.
Right.
I've had 2 close family members try to tell me not to breastfeed in private, like at my home and in company that's just family and friends. So that was irritating. but I addressed both at the moment in this, on that spot, just saying, it's my decision, please respect that, and that was all I had to say about it. So I find that, even though it does exist, it tends not to be that hard for me to stick up for myself. And it never has been. I've always been a person that is comfortable saying, don't pick on me, I guess. But especially within the last few years, I've gained a lot of confidence with doing that. I wanted to mention about parenthood and the transgender subject.
Okay.
That I call my son, and he and those types of things just because statistically it's very likely he will identify as a female. But on the off chance that he were to grow up and identify as a female, that would not change the way that I see him and love him at all. And I think that people are not sensitive to those kinds of topics, especially transgender, but also with LGBT as well. I try to always respect people's preferences in private. Like, I have a friend who comes out as transgender or genderqueer, and they want to be referred to as they rather than their biological sex. I practice that even if I'm just having a conversation with my husband, or even if I'm just talking about it to somebody who I'm loving to a friend with. Because I find that not doing that is an exercise in not respecting that person. It's also frequently used that gay will be synonymous with bad, or people use derogatory words to refer to mentally handicapped people as bad. Before I was a parent, I tried to correct people on those types of things anyways, and in a kind way, of course, because I don't want to come down on anyone for saying something that's very culturally accepted. But, just to let them know, my own personal boundary is I know people who are on the autism spectrum. I know people who have very severely mentally handicapped children. I know trans people, I know gay people. And I have a child now, and if he were to be any of those things, I would love him no matter what, and I wouldn't want to hear anyone saying something that would give him the impression he was bad for any of it. So, I try to use language that is inclusive, and I try to eliminate all language that is arbitrary.
Right.
That's something that don't really focus on as much as I should.
So could you use two terms that some people may not know? Could you explain what genderqueer is to you? I'll explain it what it is to me, because I am genderqueer, so, or I identify that. Could you explain what trans is? There still may be some people that may not know. I don't think but it's possible.
Yeah, well, transgender is when somebody is born with a specific biological sex, like I'm born female. If I were to feel male and have a male brain chemistry whilst maintaining a female body, that would be transgender.
Okay.
And the reverse is true. If a male, someone who is born with male biological brain function and physical assignment were to identify as a female, like which gender just not as transgender, that's what that looks like. Gender queer is a pretty simple concept, but some people have a hard time with grasping it because you go from looking at gender as a binary to looking at them as a spectrum. So rather than just male and female, you can think of it as a bar with male and female on either end. Gender queer people are somewhere in between. They don't identify necessarily as male or female exactly. They have a mixture of characteristics. They feel a mixture of identification, and on top of that, gender fluid people sometimes change how they feel. Sometimes they feel like masculine, sometimes they feel feminine, and sometimes it's somewhere in between. It just depends on that day, how they're feeling, and that's okay.
Right. Yeah. So for me, I'm a mildly intersex. So my biology would be probably, and I don't know exactly, but I'm just giving a rough thing. It's probably 90% male and then 10% intersex. And then, but my brain, like you talking about the emotions, totally different situation. I feel 60% male and 40% female in my head. So, like you said, how how I feel is totally different even than my what made me intersex. I don't know how much it's changed. I know that I have less testosterone than most women do, and yet I still have high sex drive. And I can still get hard-ons, but I have a hidden penis, and I had an opening at the bottom of my penis that they surgically sewed up, but they never told me about.
Right.
So they tried to have me act normal, and then when I didn't think normal, like you're talking about, my gender, I always felt like I didn't fit in. But being, like you said, genderqueer, for me, I almost feel like I'm too gendered, where I have both at the same time, but like in a mesh. Like, it doesn't, it's not, like if you said, well, you're this way, well, yeah, sort of, and this way, yeah, sort of. Yeah, like you said, the gender binary doesn't really fit to me, feel very well, even though I usually call myself a man. I just feel like that's an easier thing to put what I kind of am, but that's really not, genderqueer is really more appropriate. You talk about gender fluid, I feel that way too. I feel like I have two sides at the same time almost always, but I will say that when I feel more threatened and I don't feel as safe, I feel more male. When I feel like more safe and more loving environment, I feel a lot more female. So that's very different for me. But
I have a friend who identifies as both genders and has asked his friends to periodically throw in a her and maybe even a they. And so when referring to her, say, did you hear about what he just did? Yeah, her mother did this and that. Just kind of use both pronouns. And that's been an interesting one for me to practice, because I do these things in private as well. And even whenever I was telling my husband about it, I was like, you remember so-and-so that you were hanging out with? Yeah. He just asked for people to refer to her as both. So, sometimes it can be difficult to implement those types of things, but at the same time, it's very rewarding to open one's mind, because even if you're accepting of it hypothetically, actually practicing it is another exercise entirely, and it becomes the new normal, so to speak.
Correct. Well, yeah, I know. I've had people tell me it's too confusing. Like somehow I have no right to explain what's really going on with me. Because I tell people to explain my gender, what I usually say is I'm either a genderqueer intersex man, or I say I'm a intersex genderqueer man. And that is what I am. All of that, not one or the other, but all of that is my gender. That's all. So they feel like somehow I had to cut it down so that it's more palatable for them. Fuck you. That's really who I am, and I want people to understand what I really am. And so it's just funny how people have been, usually, somewhat nice, but some people are extremely harsh. Like somehow I need to make everything, easy for them. And just like my middle name is Marie. I changed it legally because I wanted a female name, because I don't feel like I'm totally male, so I wanted to have both a male and a female, Damien Marie, because I wanted to have a male and a female name to honor who I really am. And my mom got pissed. She's like, how are people going to know you're a man? I'm like, since when do people judge you by your middle name? First off, and if they don't understand I'm a man, who gives a fuck? I gotta fucking try to prove something to somebody? It's just like, I've had someone ask me before, well, what if people think you're gay? I'm like, so what if they thought I was gay? And what's wrong with being gay? I'm like, I'm not. I mean, even like when people get irritated when I explain my sexuality, I usually say heterosexual, but that's actually being intersex and genderqueer. That's really not appropriate. I mean, it's not correct, I would say. Really correct, I am a gynosexual because I like the vagina. So people don't understand, for the genderqueer, heterosexual or homosexual means opposite or same as. Well,
Right.
since I'm genderqueer and intersex, there's no really same as me or opposite of me. So I have to use a word that only explains what I like, not what I like as positioned from me.
Right. And that's a term that I have been familiar with before. I was loosely acquainted with somebody via the internet who was an asexual person, but also gyneromantic. They were
Right.
emotionally attracted to women,
Right.
not sexually.
Right.
So that's another thing that doesn't really get talked about very often. And I think by far asexuals are the most uncommon of the queer spectrum, except for maybe intersex like yourself, because very few people have a biological non-conforming body.
Correct.
But asexuals are probably right there in the same kind of category as far as frequency goes. But some people just don't feel sexual attraction, and that's okay.
Yeah, no, I agree. However someone is, just like I feel if someone has a very high sexual attraction, that's okay. Whatever it is okay. I mean, it's like when adults do things, and whether they like multiple people or one person or no person, or they like gay, straight, I mean, who cares? I mean, if it makes you feel good, it makes you happy, man, and you're not hurting nobody, I totally support it. So I think that it's sad that, like, especially to me, I've had some kickback sometimes with atheists, which I once again, it's always hard for me because, like you talked about how we're already kind of, on the outs of the norm. Usually I tend to wrongly, I guess, suspect or hope that all atheists will support, the non-conforming things. That's not really totally true.
Right, yeah. It's just kind of representative of society, how even people in a minority like atheism can still hold these biases.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not entirely discouraging, because a lot of times if somebody's on the fence about religion to the point of taking a position that questions it as a whole, they're more, not always, but a lot of times they're more likely to consider new ideas that they're not familiar with, such as gender fluid or different types of sexualities. So,
Yeah.
and I think that the more people talk about those alternative identities, that the more they will become part of the mainstream. My queerness is, I use queer because it's the most simple way of communicating that I am gender fluid. I am female, but I'm also a very masculine person. And at the moment, it's not so much, like, it is a fluid stance. Being a new mother, doing things like breastfeed, having a tiny child that is totally attached to me makes me feel very feminine. So, and that's not a bad thing. I enjoy it, but at the same time, it's not all of who I am. I am still a very masculine person. Sometimes, whenever I was a child, I just wore boy clothes, clothes that were designed for boys, cargo pants, cargo shorts. When I was in 4th grade, I had my cousin take me to get a haircut, and I buzzed my head. So, I've always been gender non-conforming, but I feel comfortable enough with being a female that that's just, I mean, it's simple enough to say I'm female. And I am comfortable as a woman. But I do have characteristics that I feel comfortable calling masculine, saying that I do have the mentality of a man sometimes, and I've always been that way. So I don't see any problem with just accepting that and embracing it. And I don't feel the need to force it if I'm not feeling it. Like I said, with the way that my life is right now, with the baby and breastfeeding and things like that, I feel very feminine, and I like to be that way. I've been wearing makeup sometimes, which is something I don't usually do. I've been dressing feminine, which I don't always do. My sister is getting married soon, and I'm going to be having a kind of salon day with her before that. You know, I do like to enjoy things that women typically enjoy, and a lot more so right now, but for the most part, I don't partake in those types of things. And it's just because that's who I am. It's not because I think those things are bad. I don't condemn anyone for using makeup. If you wear makeup every single day, multiple times a day, if you don't wear it for occasion, however you go about it, that's fine. However you dress, that's fine. I don't care. As long as you're not trying to make someone else feel bad about what they're doing.
I think is the key point, which I feel too. I don't care even if people don't understand me being intersex or genderqueer, or me being, a gynosexual, or me being poly, or me, being atheist, or me, the way I dress, or the fact, like you said, I shave my arms, my armpits, the fact sometimes I wear makeup. I don't care if you understand none of that. But to feel that you have the right to tell me what to do or to put me down, that I'm totally against. And I try to do the same like you were talking about. I don't tell anyone else what's right for them. I don't tell you what's right for them as an atheist, or their gender, or their sexuality, or anything. Whatever you do is you. Who am I to say that you shouldn't do what's right for you? So I agree with it. To me, it's just about it just seems like it's such a simple thing to just respect people. And now I will say, I know I've said some things that, the atheists, have done, negative things, but I will say, is if compared to religion, the atheist community is very welcoming and very understanding, and so it's still, there's no competition to me.
Right. Absolutely. But there is a definite lacking of leadership who are queer, who are women, who are of color, who are women. There are some very notable women that I can think of off the top of my head, like Madeline Murray O'Hare or Greta Christina. There are great women who are loud atheist voices, but they're also the minority, and they don't get nearly as much airtime as guys, are hitters who are male. And I think, if that changes, then it'll be, I don't know, it'll have a better idea of what atheism really is.
Yeah, I agree.
And what atheists really look like. Which is important, because, if you look at demographics, a very small percentage of the African American population is equal to any other demographic. And if we were to count even just one really outspoken black atheist, and I mean, there's people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, he is an atheist and he is black, but at the same time, he doesn't talk about atheism very much. And so,
actually, Neil deGrasse Tyson classifies himself as kind of an agnostic. He doesn't really. So I mean, I agree with you. I think he's actually an atheist. He just doesn't want to offend people, because he's even said, "Well, I don't attack religion, so I don't feel like I'm an atheist." But that's not really what atheism means. So.
It just means non-belief.
Yeah, so it's like you are an atheist. But yeah, I know what you're saying.
So anyways, I just mean, if there were even just one really big, bold voice who was black, then maybe that kid who is questioning but feels so oppressed by everyone else in his family and how he has to keep going to church and the whole church, it's a huge part of the black culture that religion is important and that God is important.
Yes.
Even down to Martin Luther King Jr., the big civil rights activist, God was a huge part of his activism. And I feel like black atheists don't have that role model. They don't really have that example. And I'm not saying that they need it necessarily. There are plenty of people who...
Yeah, I can't remember his name, but actually one of the three people that was in charge of Martin Luther King's detail or whatever was very, very active, was an atheist. And another one was actually a homosexual, but no one ever talks about it, because all they ever talk about is Martin Luther King or religion is done, not the fact that there was atheists in that movement. But they weren't given a voice because they wanted to not offend people.
Right, yeah, and that's the big thing is, just stay quiet about it. Just don't talk about it because you're going to upset people.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's right. I can see to a degree how there is a lot to be said for a little bit of time. Like if somebody's mourning a death, like a loved one, and they're asking for prayers, that's not the time to go say, prayer doesn't work, that would be insensitive. But it was like, I was watching, with my husband, I was watching the Late Late Show. I can't remember the host's name, but Russell Crowe, Eddie Izzard, and I can't remember the third guest's name. He was recently in a TV show, a new TV show, and just launched. Anyways, Russell Crowe was talking about dowsing with sticks, acting like totally saying it was real. And I was I can see why Eddie Izzard probably wouldn't want to use that forum to correct him. But at the same time, Eddie Izzard is an atheist, and I expected him to say something like, that's not real. But he didn't say anything. That kind of an example, that kind of a situation, I think, is a perfect one. To say, I know that that's something that you bonded with, bonded over with your father, and this and that, because most of was talking about how his dad used to dowse with the sticks, and say, I know that's important to you, but have you ever looked into the science? Because I've looked into it, and it doesn't seem like there's about it that it's, more than equatable with chance. So, just to question those things publicly is an important step that a lot of people are too afraid to take. And it is intimidating sometimes to just address people in a kind way about how they believe things that aren't true.
Yeah.
People get really upset about their beliefs, especially if they believe themselves. They get really upset about these things being questioned. And, it can be uncomfortable, but at the same time, why not? If you believe something that's not true, wouldn't you want to know? I would.
Right. I find that unfortunately in our community, not everyone's a rationalist or a skeptic about such things like that. There's some that I fight people all the time that believe in ancient aliens, that believe in Bigfoot, that believe in, like you said, I have someone who said they believe in spells and magic, but they're an atheist. Like, what are you even talking? That's just total nonsense. But it's funny how that I keep learning that just because you don't believe in a God really doesn't mean that everything you think is reasonable.
Right. Yeah.
There's a more chance, as you were saying. So did you like you said when you were trying to, right before you became an atheist, you said you believed in spiritual, and God, but not really religion. So did that linger on into your like, as you're saying that you're basically rationalist or skeptic now? Was that hand in hand with your atheism for you, or did you see? Because it wasn't for me. I believed in afterlife and ghosts and stuff and mediums and everything. Even though I was an atheist, it was it took me a couple of years before I was able to debunk all that for myself.
Yeah. For me, I never really believed in a lot of stuff. It's kind of similar to... Oh, yeah. Walking around, so I'm going to go behind the couch. But for me, it's kind of how I had always forced myself to believe in God.
Right.
I related to my husband like this. The only thing that ever really like wasn't hell, wasn't faith, wasn't this. That was like literally the other thing that I was actually afraid of. Like I believe that playing with the would actually invite darkness and bad things to happen. Like, that was the one thing that actually.
So you mean like karma or something? Is that what you're saying?
No, a Ouija board. Like if you were to try to communicate.
Oh, Ouija board.
Yeah.
Oh.
If you were to try to communicate with spirits, you can actually create a way for them to get to you. That was. It sounds so silly, but that was like the only thing that actually could. But of course now I don't care. It's really better.
So what changed? Or how did that change?
Whenever I started to question the religion, really saying, no, I don't buy that, and saying, no, I really don't believe in God, it kind of did just go there. Because I had never really bought into God. And the arguments that I heard were from great thinkers and not just about religion. So it kind of applied overall.
Oh, okay.
But I know a lot of people who wasn't that people. One thing that some, like, I noticed is pretty common in some skeptics is conspiracy. As odd as that sounds, there's something about questioning the mainstream that they're attracted to. Even if it's with a theory that has no substantiation.
Right.
So, the thing about conspiracy theories is the things that are conspiracies that are really happening, you can prove very easily.
Right.
Like, there are world meetings where the most wealthy people get together and they discuss kind of how they want to exercise their power, how they want to come together, that sort of thing. Those things really happen. And you can
Talking about the Bilderberg group or whatever?
Yeah, the Bilderberg group. That's one example. But there are things that you can't prove. Those things are probably happening. And there are some things that have conspiracy theories that are definitely questionable, but if you not are looking at what we have about them, it's just there's no way of really knowing what actually happened. Like the way that it was assassinated. It's a little sketchy. But,
About what? I didn't hear that.
With the assassination of John F. Kennedy.
Oh, John F. Kennedy, yeah.
There's some really good questions to be asked about how that happened and what he was responsible for it. But it probably wasn't a whole, orchestrated event with reptilians and that's
Yeah.
So,
Well, to me, the whole point would be, even if it was, this is about relativeness, even if it was, and even if it was a conspiracy, even if it was, friggin' China, I mean, what can we do about it now? I mean, it's, people get so, heated, like a religion, you don't understand, it's like, that right there, I understand, is too much. Don't be fanatical.
So, those things really go hand in hand with me. I don't tend to be a religious person when I say spiritual, because that's what I use with the time, because it was kind of like a step down. But at the same time, schooling. I just kind of, I wanted to be and I really loved that. Realizing that there were natural things, and that's the biggest investment. So that was my progression, and because I didn't really want to either one, and not to say that there was no possibility. So that could be this huge, but there's just no evidence so far that it exists, especially with this.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you, what is your goals for the future? Are you going to get more involved in? I know you're going to school. Could you tell us what it is? And are you going to get more involved in the atheist movement, or are you happy with where you're at now?
My goal is to focus, and I want to have a voice that is representative, authentically, also.
Is it possible that you can be a little closer, because it's hard to hear it totally, and I do want to hear you. That's better.
See if he'll let me sit down. I like to call it an altitude challenge. He doesn't like for me to sit down. But the thing that I want to do is comment and report news and investigate news and read that from the perspective I uniquely provide as a person, as an atheist, especially as an atheist, and mostly as a rationalist and a skeptic, because I'm not always skeptical. Like when something makes sense, I tend to go with that and then just vet it if need be. But that's the main thing. I like to tell people how it's very easy to find out when you can confirm something, and it's also very easy to find out if something either is debunked or just not supported by evidence. And if something's not supported by evidence, then it's wise not to believe in it. And so that's the perspective that I want to bring to journalism, and I would like to do it in a sort of blog, I guess, with multimedia, videos, podcasts, or just do writing. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do with this, but I do want to be someone who is an active part of the atheist community, but not with that being my purpose, just being a big part of how I report news and how I comment on news.
Well, you're starting now.
Yeah, that's actually why I decided that I wanted to do that, is because I noticed that's what I was doing in my free time. I was talking about current events, and that's what I really enjoy doing. I like to research things and find out what's going on, what is it that people are talking about and are they not talking about, and just things like that. And I really enjoy finding out truth and finding relevant information, digesting information to find what's important out of it. Like the Baltimore riots that are going on right now. People like to call the guys that are out there rioting, they call them thugs, and they say they're rioting when most of them are doing peaceful protesting and not doing anything, and they haven't been protesting for days and days, and outside of Baltimore for years, and it just becomes a cop-out, really, to say that they're thugs, rather than to look at why they are upset. And the problem is not that they're breaking the law. The problem is not that cops actually have, criminals on their hands. The problem is that cops use excessive force cops kill people, cops profile people, and they have had an ever-growing problem with race relations. And the issue is a lot more complex than a lot of people bother to admit or look at. So, it's important to look at things in a comprehensive way and not just take it at face value and say, oh, people are breaking windows and stealing things, oh, they must be the bad guys. Of course doing that is bad, but why are they doing it? That's the really important question about what's going on in that is why breaking windows and stealing things. Well, it's because there's a bunch of other people protesting that there's a system of injustice. And the system of injustice is a much larger, much more important problem than the broken windows. But people like to throw the red herring and say, no, it's the broken windows. These guys are thugs. So, I have a problem with that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I have a problem with that too. And even if the fact that the people are stealing, there's a problem. It's called poverty, and it's a problem of one set of people having more opportunity. We have schools where some kids can't even get a good education in a public. Where you go to another richer neighborhood, it's still public money, but yet the schools are way better and they're getting a better education. It's just a bunch of unfair and systemic injustice. And I totally agree about what the cops are doing. It's but then again, people don't really understand the Supreme Court decided, that the police are only there to enforce laws. They're not there to protect us. They have no duty or obligation to protect us. They can if they want. They don't have to if they don't want to. And then that to me, that's setting something up for a problem. But I really appreciate you spending your time and doing the interview, and I think that. You're going to make a real difference, and I appreciate you.
I appreciate that. I hope to get those out there, and I have some connections that I think people that I greatly respect, like individuals like Aaron Raw, like Stephanie Hughes, like Matt Dillahunty. Some of those I know better than others, and some, it's just starting, but I would really like to grow and become more acquainted with these people up close and personal. I would say Arn's probably the closest to my husband and I. He's a great guy. And that's what I really like about voices in this community. And that's why it bothers me when people say that, oh, so-and-so is sexist, or so-and-so is racist, just because they happen to be white. That's not true. Most of the people who are big voices in this community, who I actually very much respect as individuals. And so, I like that about the community, because a lot of times when you look at voices in other communities, like Christian communities or political communities, like people who actually examine their lives, they're morally bankrupt.
Yeah.
Like Joel Osteen or Joyce Meyer or like any politician, basically. It's a community that I strive to be a part of. I am obviously part of this community, but I'd like to be a speaker and a voice in that community of my own, because I think I would be a really good company, and I include you in that as well.
Awesome, and I agree. So, is there anything else that you want to say or ask me before you go?
I was curious when you said earlier about the proving a negative, because I've never heard that to be something you can do. So, would you elaborate on that?
Well, like I said, it's a long way to explain how you disprove a negative, but there's a statement that people make that say that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. But in that very statement, you're acknowledging there's such thing as an evidence of absence.
Right.
So in other words, if there is a confined space that something should be, and it is not present, that is evidence of absence. And thus, that's not a logical fallacy. People have this problem. So in other words, just by saying I don't see anything, so thus Japan is not real, that doesn't make it not real. But if I go to the geographic coordinates of where Japan's supposed to be and it's just water, then I have evidence that Japan is not at the coordinates that you gave me.
Right.
So you can prove a negative something, but you have to have, it's harder. So when like people say that you can't prove it, you can prove it. It just takes a lot more work. So like you said,
a definition to disprove it.
Well, that's also a bigger issue entirely. That's why I tell people that goes back to theological non-cognitivism. That when you use words like God, like I tell people, the problem that you have to understand is, to me, I usually don't attack people too much, but I would, in other words, an axiological atheist really doesn't care about atheism that much, in the sense that most people think of it. It's irrelevant. God's not real. There's no evidence of it. It takes more of an agnostic than actually an atheist position. An agnostic with an I, or theological non-cognitivism, that the words you're using don't have any meaning. And then axiology would say that axiology atheists would say that the term God is not a name; it's a title of authority. It's a position, and it's an oppressive position, which would be against formal axiology thinking. No one has it. It goes back to sexism or something. No one has the right to say, I'm better than you, thus you will do what I say, a forced oppression. So the concept of God is really the accepting of a concept of forced oppression. In other words, to an axiological atheist, if there was a supreme being, let's say a being that has all these powers, that doesn't make them a God. Because
Right.
the term God is an authority position. So, as far as I'm concerned, if like someone said before, well, what if there's an alien that's stronger than humans, 10 times stronger? That's an alien. That's not a God.
Right.
Well, what if we thought that those powers were God-like? That is not a God. A God is a position. They have no right to come here and tell humans how to behave. So, they have no right to tell women they don't have rights. In other words, or that people can't be gay or whatever. So they have no right to run other people's lives. So I'm saying, so like you said about proving a negative, so it's that kind of sense that you're not talking something reasonable. You are talking actually from a negative position to begin with. And so people also don't get, when you say you cannot prove a negative, that statement is a negative. It's a non-positive statement. So they've already, to say that, you've actually already contradicted yourself. Or when they say, oh, well, not everything can't be known. And then I always tell them, but you know that, so then you know that everything can't be known, which is proof that you just disproved yourself. So the thing is, though, I'll send you a link on it. There's a person who's a logician that talks about it a lot better than I can. He was in Skeptics magazine in, I think, 2007. He basically says that most of the atheists use that term. It just, they don't know what they're talking about. But the other problem in general is that a lot of atheists, and I've had someone attack me yesterday, tell me that, blah, 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 blah. You just talk all this nonsense. Yeah, it's so funny how they're anti-intellectualism. Because that's what it is. I'm explaining things to you. You don't have to agree. You don't have to use it. But to tell me that I'm talking nonsense is it yourself. You're talking nonsense. So, but in general, there's too much in the atheist community of saying that philosophy is unnecessary, that philosophy confuses things, when all these statements are just inherently not true. Or that somehow philosophy is anti-science or something. Which is not true, because actually when you say I use the scientific method, you should just say you're using the philosophy method, because that's actually part of the philosophy of science. The scientific method uses rationalism, empiricism, and what's called methodological skepticism. That is what the scientific method is. So those are all part of empiricism, or understanding of knowledge, which are all part of philosophy.
That's a good point, yeah. I do want to distinguish. Sometimes I say I don't like philosophy, but more accurately, I should say I don't like philosophers for the most part.
Yeah.
Because the people who are into philosophy do it just explicitly to view and abstract a concept to the point of absurdity so that they can't be proven wrong. And they find all kinds of loopholes, and they like to talk in terms of nothing is absolute, solipsism and that sort of thing. How do you know you're not just a brain in a bat? It can get ridiculous, but I actually do enjoy philosophy in terms like solipsism. It can be very useful. Like, it's one word that just explains a whole position, like we were talking about before the interview. I try to avoid using terms like that on the whole without explaining it, especially because even though they can be very useful, a lot of times if somebody doesn't know what that means, then everything else just goes right over their head.
Right, but so I'm going to address one thing real quick, what you were saying about philosophers. I don't like the philosophy of religion. I don't like philosophers of religion. Definitely, they are the ones that are causing a lot of bullshit problems. So yes, those ones, like you said about C.S. Lewis, that kind of shit, that's total fucking bullshit. But if you like you're talking about solipsism too, do you know that when they did a study of all the professors, 1,500 and something of professors in the United States of philosophy, and they asked them how many don't believe in the real world, or they believe that, like you said, solipsism could be possible, or it's called external world skepticism or whatever, or extreme skepticism. Only 4.8% agree to that. So
yeah.
When you talk about that, some people try to use that as a thing. Well, most real philosophers don't use that. They think that's stupid. Yeah. So I'm just saying that
somebody doesn't know what they're talking about.
Yeah. So I would say I agree with you that some people try to use some of the things against reality or against science, and then those uses of philosophy I think are inherently bad. So I don't think that everything in philosophy is wonderful, especially if it gets, like you said, obtruse or whatever, or tries to use things to deny. But I think on the other hand, we should be, as atheists, to me, that's what I do, is try to use all the tools of philosophy that are valid, that are good, that help clarify things, that help actually debunk all the bullshit and allow us to actually be more reasonable.
I fully agree with you. That's one of the reasons that I do enjoy Erosion, and Dennett as well. Dennett, his work is very fun for me. I like him a lot. So I appreciate you clarifying what you meant about proving because the problem with that is that a lot of people will say you can't disprove God, and it's like, well, yeah, I can, but you have to define it first.
All right, so let me just stress that real quick. So I tell just a couple things, and I'll try to disproving God. So first off, let's just say that I accept the concept, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't matter. So, but every concept of God has to be some form of a supernatural agent. Okay? Right. And if we require that the real world would be evidence of that fact. In other words, that if science looked at things, there should be evidence that something other than nature produced it, like creationism, the claim that something other than nature produced, the world, or geology, or dinosaurs, or anything, human intelligence, morality. I mean, there has to be things that can only be supernatural. And I tell people that one of the things that you need to understand, the strongest things in all of science that's been proven 1 billion times or whatever, is that everywhere they look, in every way they look, in every science, in every test, proves the same thing. There is nothing supernatural. So when you say that there can be a God, it hasn't been proven. That's all science ever has proved, is that every magical claim, every supernatural claim, everything that God could have been found in, involved in, part of, the cause of, have been proven to be not that, and to be only nature. In fact, it is such a fact that the actual scientific method itself has what's called a priori, which is, of course, my love, rationalism, a priori of what's called methodological naturalism. which basically says that only the testable, definable, real world exists, external of our beliefs about it.
Right.
So that's what scientific method actually starts with. It requires it. So when you say science can't debunk religion, but the scientific method, well, I would say, well, the scientific method itself already debunks it because it doesn't even allow it as an example. Because it already has affirmed that the truth of reality is non-supernatural. So, I'm just going back to your thing. So, it does. And I think the problem is some scientists talk about, like Dawkins, are a great guy, but when he talks about philosophy, he's not really understanding that he is talking philosophy. Every time that you show something, you've just proven that God's not there. Every time you do that. So it goes back to, if I look in your pocket and you said the planet Pluto was there, let's just say I look and it's not there, then I've proven the absence of evidence. That there is nothing there. There is evidence that the planet Pluto's not there. Although, like I said, being a rationalist in general, I know that you're defining something that cannot happen in the natural world. Just like if you said the Nile River's in your purse, or in your backyard. Yeah, the Nile River is in Egypt. It can't even be in South Africa. Because it's geographically positioned to a place. So when you make a claim, and your claim does not fit the tangible ability of the world, it's already debunked without even having to do anything. Right. So as I'm saying, so once you get that, I know it's hard for people, but once you get that, when you say God did something and we look and it didn't, then your thing is just debunked. So and understand too that when they say that, well, we don't know how things are, at the edge of the galaxy. Well, that's actually not true. We know there's no cubed planets anywhere in the solar system. Because the whole fact of spin and rotation and the whole fact of gravity itself, even makes everything spin. In fact, the solar system spin, everything circle is a circle. So there won't be anything perfect cubed anywhere. Right. So anything is not possible. And even without looking, we know the limits of what is possible. Like I said, we know that the Nile River cannot be in your backyard. There's limits to reality. Because of that debunks any possibility of God. So I'm just saying that's how you can do the opposite. But I'll send you the article too. But that's one way that you can debunk, because if something can't be true, it can't be true. I mean, it's not. In other words, it also goes back to a thing in philosophy called the law of non-contradiction. In other words, you can't be both something and not something at the same time. Either something is true or false. There's no, well, it is and it isn't. It can't be at the same time. You can't be. So it goes to the understanding of how you address things. So people don't. They don't get, like, you can't be, well, that doesn't mean that every single thing is like that, but inherently that's the truth. Like, you can't be a human and a dog at the same time. If you say both those things, so in a sense, that there could be some things that are dual in nature, but they're still limited by structures of their duality.
Absolutely.
So when you make claims, it has to fit things. So, but like I said, you don't even have to do all that. All you really have to say is that the term God doesn't mean anything. So there's no reason to doubt something that hasn't even been defined. That's really the simplest, and because that's really true. It hasn't been. You've not provided any tangible, reasonable, real world evidence that is a requirement. And like I said, that's, so you don't have to have deep philosophy. I could go in and explain all kinds of different things, but it really doesn't matter because you're not talking about anything real. And just like one time someone said to me that, well, how do you know that there's not, like in your room or here, how do we know there's not a purple cow that you just can't see? I said, well, see, but that you're actually asking me to believe something more than that. Because if I walk over there and I don't hit the cow, it's also not in this plane of reality. And even if, let's say that we don't see it, but it's still here, how is it surviving? How is it eating in your house? Wouldn't there be evidence of things being eaten, even if it's invisible? Oh, now it doesn't need to eat? Now it's not affecting the natural world? Then how do we even know it's there? And then it's being there, it's actually meaningless because it's not doing an impression on the ground. You can't walk into it. It's not doing anything, eating anything. It's not interacting with the world. There's no reason to believe that the cow's even there.
Right. Yeah, I use that logic about God a lot, saying, if God exists, it is so, or if the supernatural even exists, it's so unevident that it has absolutely no impact on our lives whatsoever.
Right.
So, might as well not worry about it.
Well, I would say that it actually shows that it's not there. Right. And to make a positive claim to something being there, you have to have. To me, when you talk about things, there's basically in philosophy, the justified true belief equals knowledge. But there's three categories that you have to see. What is justified? You got to establish that. You got to establish things that are true, and you got to establish what's a belief. So, what I tell people is there's three philosophies that most, to me, atheists should know to help to understand this and help debunk bad thinking. The one is for justification, you should use the philosophy of reliabilism. You can look it up online. I can also send you links. Reliabilism. To know if something is true, you should use the correspondence theory of truth. It's a type of philosophy that basically, both those are actually very, very reasonable. The reliabilism is you only trust a reliable method. In other words, or a reliable source. So the Bible is not reliable, thus the source is gone. You can't use that. It's not a reliable source. It's not. You can't find truth out of something that's not true. I mean, it isn't done. So I mean, it's just, it makes sense. It's not justified. It's about justification. So you can't hold a belief that's not justified. That's about reliabilism. But it can be used for its truth also. But then the correspondence theory of truth says that what you say has to correspond with the truth in the real world. In other words, if I say that right now you're a human being, you can't be a dog. No matter how much I believe it. That belief is totally invalid. It's got no truth to it if it doesn't match something in the natural world. So it's a hard-sounding philosophy, but it's really just common sense thinking. Something has to correspond to the natural world. Otherwise, it is not true. So, and then the other thing is that it's called the ethics of belief. There's a philosophy called the ethics of belief that means that you should believe things because it's reasonable, it's true. But there's actually a moral duty to only believe things that are true and reasonable, and that you should be open to change belief upon new evidence because you're ethically sound in how you believe things. So if most people would just do that, those three things, they wouldn't believe all kinds of nonsense. Because they would only take reliable sources, they would only believe which matches truth in the natural world, and they would be only having beliefs that are sound, and they would remove beliefs that lose, credibility.
I'm totally with you on that. I think that people would be a lot better off if they would do just that. Somebody, I can't remember who it was just right off the top of my head, but I think it's actually Bogosian who says he wants to believe as many true things as possible and as few false things.
Right.
That's a way of putting it. It's very simple. It's very straightforward. It's to the point. Why believe things that aren't true, and also why limit what you should know. If it's available.
I totally agree. But that goes back to one of the things too. Some atheists say that I don't want to believe anything or I don't believe anything. That's just nonsense. First off, in philosophy, like Bogosian would know, that there's no such thing as having no beliefs. In fact, feeling you have no belief is itself a belief.
Right, yeah. That's true.
What we want to have, like you were talking about him, is true beliefs. That's the point. It's not that we shouldn't have an atheist have beliefs. No, we should make sure that they're true. And have as few, like you said, false beliefs as possible, because that is the problem. Having a belief, that's not the problem. Having a false belief, yeah, that's a problem.
Right, and it harms people. It may not harm people all the time, it may not harm in good ways, but sometimes it does, like homeopathy.
Oh, yes.
Some people stop taking effective treatments for very dangerous diseases in favor of homeopathy because somebody has snake oiled them into believing that it's going to help, and then they end up with some kind of detrimental handicap for the rest of their lives, or even worse, sometimes they die. And you would think, like, when you see it in a box at a grocery store, you know, oh, what does it matter? Nobody, that's not hurting anybody. Like, I would be the kind of person to see if somebody was grabbing, like, reaching for a homeopathic remedy, I would say, you should probably not buy that because there are better options out there.
Yeah.
And some people would see that as invasive. And there's, you know, I mean, and to a degree, I will concede it is invasive, but at the same time, I think, like you said, the ethics of believing.
Right. Ethics of belief, exactly.
So, yeah.
Well, like I said, and I didn't invent that term and put those together. That's actually a philosophy, the ethics of belief.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but I was saying, a lot of people think that, because I have a few on my page, they think that because they've never heard of all this stuff, that I'm making all this shit up off the top of my head. No, actually, I just read stuff. Yeah, I'm actually educated. You know, I don't look like it, I know, but yeah. But anyways, well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'm gonna go. I'll send you some links.
Sorry, what was that?
I said I'm gonna go ahead and go. It's been very nice talking to you. I appreciate it. I said I will send you some links on Facebook.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.